and a warm welcome to you all. Welcome to Empowering the Truth. This is brought to you by the International Center for Journalists, or ICFJ, and it's a series in partnership with us at Boom. Boom Live, we're fact checkers based in South Asia, in India, Bangladesh, and Myanmar. You can find us at boomlive.in. My name is HR Venkatesh, and I'm the Director in Training and Research here at Boom. And this is the third of our conversations this March. And we have a rare treat in store with Dr. Masato Kajimoto. I'll explain what I mean by rare treat when I'm introducing him. But as I said, that's coming up now. But this is part of Empowering the Truth. And we've already had two conversations in the previous two Thursdays this March. And so, including today, there is just one more. That's next week. So, that you can see on your screens there. The first was the 7th of March. We had Alliances and Networks. We had Rajneel Kamath speaking about the Misinformation Combat Alliance and the history of network building in South Asia. We had Reaching Critical Audiences with Sudipto Mondal and Meena Kotwal from a oppressed caste perspective, but also all other minority perspective. We also had, of course, we will also have next week Ritvij Parikh, who is someone who specializes in AI and journalism, and Boom's Karen Rebello, who specializes in understanding what deepfakes are all about. But today we have on the topic how to build audience trust, we have Dr. Masato Kajimoto. And you can't understand how to build audience trust unless you really know what trust means. And, we've got to get to the basics. So I'm hoping to learn a lot out of Masato's session today. He's with the University of Hong Kong. He's a professor there. He's famous for running Annie, which is a student-led fact-checking network, I should say now. And he's also an expert in news literacy. But I feel that, Masato brings a journalistic lens to what he does, but obviously he's an academic first. So you already have two lenses. And then you have a third news literacy lens, which I would say is both for practitioners and in a personal capacity. So whenever I listen to him, I come away with something for both my professional self as well as my personal life. That's what I meant by rare treat. So what we'll do is, this is the introduction. I'll hand it over to Masato in a second. He'll speak for some time. He'll show you some slides on the topic of trust. Then we'll have a Q&A, and please start asking your questions and start putting in your questions as and when you have them. We'll try and get to as many questions as possible. With that, it's over to you, Masato.
All right. Thank you so much, Venkatesh, for your very kind introduction. My name is Masato Kajimoto. I'm a professor of journalism at the University of Hong Kong. And today I was given a very tough topic to discuss. So let me share my screen first and see if this works. Yeah, hopefully it's working now. Right. So the topic of this year's talk is strengthening audience trust. And I was invited to speak last year for the same event, Truth Global Summit. And last year's topic was about how to make truth go viral. It was a very difficult topic to discuss. And this year, again, it's another very tough topic. So last year I started with this slide. And this year I'm doing the same thing. I really don't think I can give you a satisfying answer how to build audience trust. But what I'm trying to do is to share some of my thoughts to kickstart some of discussions on this topic with Venkatesh, and afterwards with many of you who are listening to this webinar, and see if we can sort of, together brainstorm what to do, what news organizations can do and should do to build trust among the audience. So I hope I can be provocative enough to have some lively conversation after like probably 15-minute presentation. So trust is complicated. And this is not just me saying it. There aren't many research in this area. If you look around research papers in journalism studies, media and communication, there aren't many papers dealing with trust in media. There are lots of commercial research done by PR firms. How much do people trust news media? It's more applied research rather than academic research. But there are few ones that I can recommend. So one comes from Reuters Institute at Oxford University. The other one is from the University of Chicago in collaboration with AP. And I think the headline that summarizes AP's research kind of tells us why this is very complicated. My media versus the media. Even though people don't trust the media, when it comes to the media they consume, they tend to trust. So the question is, how do they choose which media to consume in the first place? So that's a big question. It's very, very complicated. And one case study I want to share is Maria Ressa. And probably many of you have already heard this really famous quote from 2022, I think. She has won Nobel Peace Prize for her work in the Philippines. She is the founder of web news media called Rappler. Before that, she was a correspondent working for CNN. And this quote on you see on the screen: without facts, you can't have truth. Without truth, you can't have trust. Without trust, we have no shared reality, no rule of law, no democracy. This has been quoted many times. I've seen so many journalism educators using this quote to start their lecture and also some talks. Now, if you have been following her work, you also know that there was a bit of controversy surrounding her organization Rappler. When Reuters Institute from the Oxford University published its 2022 digital news report, they had these statistics talking about what the publics in the Philippines think about different news outlets. And Maria's news organization, Rappler, ranked on the very bottom. Some news organizations in the Philippines use these statistics to attack her and her publication, saying that, well, even the Nobel Peace Prize winner's publication is the least trusted in our country. What does it tell us? You know, so obviously this is very complicated issue. In fact, Maria herself came out and sort of criticized this kind of research. And her argument was that the methodology is somehow problematic because in a very polarized society like the Philippines, people who is always looking for something to attack her will use this kind of statistics to attack her. And Reuters Institute, of course, recognizes this. And they came out and said, no, our research was misunderstood. And I think this line from the director of the Reuters Institute summarizes my thinking in a very nice way. More than factual accuracy, trust in news is also about how journalism is interpreted in light of domestic politics and partisan sympathies. So the headline says the cost of courage. So in a way, if you strive for independent journalism, try to monitor the powerful and try to dig out fact-based information that authorities and people with power don't want the public to know, you will eventually get attacked. And that attack doesn't only come from the authorities. The public who support those authorities, they also attack you. So if you survey them, of course, your publication gets less trust in the survey results. So what we need to think about when it comes to trust, we should think about why do people decide to trust or not trust news media in the first place? Or in Maria's case, particular journalist. Why should people trust her, or why people don't trust her? What are the reasons? Now, I do have this conversation quite often with my colleagues at the university who are also teaching journalism, and also people who are from the industry when we have lunch and coffee and dinner. Many people in the industry, especially those senior editors, often tells me that we publish our ethical standards on our website. People should read it, then they can trust us. Some other editors tell me that, well, we have a track record of good news reporting. So historically, we are always trusted. Why people no longer trust us? Because they don't know about our history. So that's the kind of common things that I hear quite often from the people working in the industry. They often say quality news media outlets are committed to accuracy. They're striving for, balance and fairness. They take responsibility. They are accountable for their content legally. If they publish something non-factual, they could be sued for defamation or other things, and they will take legal responsibility for that, right? They are different from anonymous social media accounts or some YouTube influencers who can just take down the content and hide somewhere and avoid responsibility. Whereas news organizations and journalists, they put their names, their company has to be legally accountable for the content they publish. So therefore, people should trust them more. Another reason I hear quite often is that they are ethically conscious. When they make editorial decisions, they think about ethical implications of their news reporting. And many influencers don't do that. So that's another differentiation they are trying to make there. Track record I already mentioned. And at the end of the day, they say we have journalistic integrity. And other people who might be also popular as a source of information and news, but they don't have journalistic integrity. Therefore, we should be trusted more than the others. So those are the reasons that they often mention. But if you think about how trust works, this is my feeling. Trust itself is a psychological state, not necessarily a rational thinking or a result of logical reasoning. People trust somebody or something because they trust, they have some gut feeling that this person is a good person, this person is a bad person. It's really emotional. So if I throw this question at myself, why do I trust my doctors and friends? Why do I trust certain brands and why I don't trust other brands? Why do I trust this politician but not the others? So if I think about all those reasons, I realize that it's not always rational. Sometimes I trust somebody because they are from my hometown. No other reasons, but I feel like people who grew up in my city shouldn't be a bad person. And that's good enough reason for me to trust this person. Um, so, and then if you look around, if you think about why you trust your mother, your father, it's not always because your mother's always accurate. It's because of love, because of other reasons, right? And I have read a lot of papers. Again, I said research in trust is not that popular in our field, but if you look elsewhere, studies on trust is very big in psychology, and that's why I said it's a psychological state, and it has been traditionally one of the most discussed topics in philosophy. So if you look research papers in philosophy, there are a lot of papers discussing trust and what it means. And I learned a lot from those research in philosophy. And my very simplified takeaway is this: trust apparently is often built on dependence and risk calculation. So the reason for you to trust something, let's say news organization, can be rational, yes, sometimes, but it can be also very cultural. Well, my family has been traditionally subscribing to this particular newspaper. My grandfather was reading it, my father was reading it, my mother's reading it, and I'm reading it ever since I was 10. I trust it. It can be emotional. It can be bipartisan, like in case of Maria Ressa and other places in the world. If you are living in a politically polarized society, if you support certain political party or political leaning, and you know which newspaper editorially is in line with your belief. So you trust that paper. It doesn't matter what they report. You don't trust the other newspapers or news organizations that support the other side of the political spectrum. So that's very emotional attachment you have to a certain news organization. And again, regardless of the content. Sometimes you are dependent. In philosophy, they use examples of like children being abused by the parents. They still trust their parents, even though they are the abusers, because their life highly depends on the parents. Without them, kids cannot survive. So natural instinct is that I should trust this person, regardless of what he or she does to me. So there are lots of emotional, I mean, that sounds rational, but it's also very problematic reasoning if you think about it. And also the risk calculation. If I deviate from my community, if I say something that is different from, if I start subscribing to other news organizations that my family disapprove of, am I going to be alienated? What is the risk of publicly saying that I support this news organization instead of that, support this politician instead of that? Is it worth risking the family conflict? Sometimes yes, sometimes no, but you have to calculate the risk, right? So it seems like trust is much more complicated than simple thing like, oh, this newspaper tells the truth, therefore you should trust. It's not, it doesn't seem to work that way. So it's something that we should be thinking about. And the worst of all, and this is where I think the main theme of the whole series comes from, disinformation. People, we call them bad actors, who are intentionally producing misleading content or disinformation. They know how to manipulate trust as well. They know how to create the kind of content that resonate with people emotionally. What they are trying to do is to psychologically affect people's perception towards certain political candidates or certain social issues like climate change. What they're trying to do is to actually manipulate the trust itself, and they are very successful in this. So when you think about the ecosystem of misinformation and disinformation, and particular groups of people who are motivated to influence the public opinions, knowing that what they're churning out and producing is not really accurate, they are trying to manipulate your emotional reactions and also your feeling of trust. So if that's the case, the question I always ask to those friends in journalism industry is that, well, the other side is trying to manipulate audience's trust and they are successful. And you are always talking about building trust among the audience. But isn't that kind of like bringing yourself down to the level of what they are doing? It's like government A is doing lots of propaganda work and you're not happy with it. To counter that propaganda narratives, you create your own propaganda and then try to confuse the audience even more. So, yeah, to me, sometimes it feels like news organizations trying to build more trust among the audience is like bringing yourself down to the level of those people who are trying to manipulate people's trust. You're trying to do the same thing for probably a good cause, but the idea of trying to change people's trust, manufacture people's trust, if I can use that word, is not something that I think you shouldn't be actually doing. So this is going to be my last slide. I think to me, gaining trust is a result, not necessarily a goal. As soon as you set gaining trust as your goal of your journalistic activities, I think you're already failing it. You do what you do, and then trust comes afterwards, right? So it has to be the result of what you do rather than you're trying to achieve, you know, having more trust. That shouldn't be the aim of your journalistic activities. Now, I do teach news literacy, and when I where a head of news literacy educator, I am dealing with news audience. I'm training the news audience. And my catchline that I always use in my teaching is this: you can trust the intention. You can trust the intention of legacy media who's trying to do a good job and trying to tell the truthful account of what happened. You can trust the intention of your friends who's sharing photos and videos through WhatsApp. You can trust the intention of your family members who are sharing lots of questionable information about medical treatment, about to cure COVID-19, for example. You can trust the intention, and you may trust the person who's sharing that information, but you can separate the trust from the accuracy of the information. So I always say that you can trust the intention, but you must verify the information every time. So separate the trust you have on organizations or a person. That's the source of information. And regardless of where you get the information from, you have to verify it. So separate the trust and verification, so to speak. So that's what I'm telling to the future news audience. If I'm doing like, trainings in schools, not many students consume news on daily basis, but they will eventually when they become bigger. So that's what I tell them. So flip side of that, if I talk to journalists, then my question is that shouldn't journalists say, you may not trust us? So trust doesn't matter as long as you are telling truthful account of what happened with all facts, then you should feel okay with it, right? So you may not trust us now, but that doesn't change the fact that we are trying to provide truthful, accurate information. If you want to stretch this a little bit, you can consider yourself like a Galileo, you know, um, or Copernicus, those people who said, well, Earth is not the center of the solar system or universe. It's actually the Earth is revolving around the sun. Many people hated them. The church didn't trust them, but that didn't change the fact. And somehow humans were clever enough to keep the document that they produced. I mean, there was a chance, I'm sure, that all those books and research can be like burned down and no longer, available, but it didn't happen that way. Somebody, even though they didn't have much public trust, someone thought, well, maybe we should keep this record. And one thing led to another. Isaac Newton came up with the idea, right? Um, um, so of like a relative gravity. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that when you think about trust in journalism, that is not necessarily something that you should strive for gaining. But if you're doing your work in trust will come afterwards. Well, I will stop here. This is my last slide. Thank you.
Thank you, Masato. One thing I guess we can, I have some trust-specific questions, but the other thing I take away from your slides usually is that I must lean into using typo, large type fonts, more and more because it's easily
Right.
readable, and
Yeah.
especially if you're on a phone screen. So
Yeah.
thank you for that
It's
design.
my age, Venkatesh.
This,
I need reading glasses,
right. Okay, so it's time for Q&A. I want you all to please start adding your questions. But I'm going to slip a couple of questions in first. But but some of these comments they're quite funny. So I'm going to take a question/comment by Karen Rebello, who says a very large global news media organization made sweatshirts that said, "Trust me, I'm a journalist." Do you have any thoughts on their tagline? I also have a cup by the museum that says, "Trust me, I'm a reporter." So, any
I mean,
comments?
they're using this taglines like seriously, or it's sort of like tongue in
No,
cheek, kind of
they
in a
use it
sarcastic
seriously.
manner.
No, they absolutely use it seriously. I've seen them myself, so I can corroborate what Karen is saying.
I see. Well, Karen, I don't know how you feel about this. I want to know what you think about it, but I think it backfires quite easily if you say this. You know, I mean, it's like same as trust me, I'm a politician. I would think that it's as bad as that. Yeah, I don't think it works. Yeah.
So I have this. Yeah, it doesn't work absolutely. Before I come to the next question, then please add in more questions. In the same kind of way that you spoke, and also to echo a bit of what Karen's question asks. In the beginning we said to ourselves, because some of us are fact checkers here, many of us, yeah.
Mm,
We're fact checkers, so we look at facts, we find facts.
right.
Yes, when we are able to find the facts and verify them, it's great. Many times we are not able to because the material out there has no adherence to fact, right? So
Right.
then one might say, oh, we're not just looking for facts, but we're also trying to tell you the truth. So there's this
Uh-huh.
tendency to use the word war, war for truth
Mm,
and that kind of thing. And then one realizes that the truth can be quite subjective, right?
right.
Depending on
Right.
where you are.
Right.
So ultimately, all we're left with, okay, so facts, truth, in the pursuit of facts, we're also in the pursuit of truth. But ultimately, from what you're saying, and I believe as well, that we cannot do all of that. All we can guarantee is that we are honest in our effort and
Hmm.
honest in our intentions when
Right.
it comes to the principle of intellectual honesty. So, would
Mm.
you care to elaborate a bit on that? Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that statement wholeheartedly. I mean, at the end of the day, that's as much as you can do, right? And oftentimes, audience's reaction is irrational. Like I said, I mean, trust is often irrational. So, I mean, to me, facts are facts, and it doesn't matter where it comes from. Sometimes government tells you the fact, and then we say that, yes, this is verified. Government told, facts. And then people who don't support the government accuses us of being a propaganda. But we say, no, no, it doesn't matter who says this. That doesn't change what facts are. So I think that's how we kind of have to, we should frame our work. And then also the truth, when it comes to truth, in our curriculum, Venkatesh, you know this, we always use the word provisional truth. So, the journalists can tell provisional truth. This is as much as we gathered. This is as much as I know. With the available evidence, this is probably what happened. With the available evidence, this is probably what is closer to the truth. It's the truth with small letter T, not the capital T. And I think that kind of framing has to be transparent to the audience. And that's as much as we can do.
Got it.
Yeah.
Habib Rahman asks, how much do you think earning trust is important for fact-checking organizations? Since the popularity of fact-checking organizations are lesser compared to legacy media, what are the ways to gain audience trust and make fact-checking more impactful?
Yeah, so again, I think that's the wrong question. I think that's what I was trying to say in my presentation, at least to me, um, asking yourself, how do I gain more trust? How do I make my work a bit more impactful is a wrong way to think about this issue. Because then ultimately, why don't you exaggerate a little bit? Sensationalize the headline. You become more popular. You will get more supporters. If you survey the public, they will recognize your brand name more than before if you sensationalize your coverage. Yes, you might have more haters, but you might have more supporters. But that shouldn't be your ultimate goal, right? So I think you should rethink about the way you see values in fact-checking activities. For me, I tell my students that, well, the first goal of fact-checking is to set the record straight. If somebody Google search, uh, does ivermectin cure COVID-19? Has it been proven with clinical trial? Then the result should come out and say, no, it has been fact-checked by 5 different news organizations in 3 different languages. They all said there is no scientific evidence to say so at this point. So that record has to be there. And fact-checking process is to produce that the piece of information that somebody wants to know what facts are. You have that available. And I think this is the reason why organizations like Bellingcat is working with International Criminal Court. So instead of gaining trust from the public, they actually work with the court and say, when the war is over, there will be war crime tribunals. When that happens, we should know which video is authentic, actually showing soldiers committing atrocities, which video is a complete nonsense, digitally edited version of nothing, events that never happened. So that kind of records have to be kept by somebody. And I think fact-checking ultimately is the exercise of doing that first. Yeah, so I think that's a bit different. I mean, the way I think about trust is a bit different, I guess.
Yeah, that makes sense. And of course, you're absolutely right. I just want to repeat what Masato said. Fact checkers are all about preserving the historical record. That's very, very important, super critical. Nobody is doing it, or not very few people are actually doing it. It's the principle really of when you see something problematic or potentially problematic and you want to fact check it, you archive it first. The fact checker's work is an archive itself. But beyond that, a fact checker cannot, I mean, beyond, it's very difficult to play two roles at the same time. And if you want to be more popular, maybe there are other ways of doing it. And actually, I have a question about that. Masato, will come towards that in the end. I'm going to ask you if media literacy can do a little bit of that job, but I'll come if there are no more questions. Let me go to Jatin Gandhi's question, who's also a friend of ours at Booms, also representing a fact-checking organization, Vishwas. Can there be honesty without transparency, especially when you want to use it to build trust? He asks.
Again, I kind of see the pattern here. I think if you try to build trust, I think you are asking wrong question to yourself in the first place. I think that's my theme for today. If you are honest and transparent, yes, I hope that the trust comes with it. But being transparent it shouldn't be the aim. So you should be honest. You should be transparent, not because that way you can gain trust, right? The rationale should be, I want to be honest about what I know and what I don't know. And I want to be transparent about my methodology, and especially things that I didn't know or I couldn't find out. I want to tell the audience. So that's because you won't really set the record straight and you want to bring the conversation forward. If you don't know something, then maybe there are some other people who out there who might be able to help you, right? Hey, I read your story and I'm an expert in this. I actually know a little bit more than what you dug up. So that might lead to more investigation. So that should be the goal. Again, I think those bad actors, they are not transparent. If you think about online scam, you probably understand this better. They really know how to gain trust. And they are not transparent. They are not honest at all, but they are really good at building trust. So I think honesty and transparency doesn't necessarily give you more trust. It's the opposite. If you hide those intentions, there are ways to manipulate people's trust. So I think those two things are a bit separate.
Yes. Okay, let me get in Aditi Tandon's question. She asks, there are news organizations or journalists in India, for example, that knowingly spread disinformation.
Yeah.
As a journalist myself, I don't trust them, and I would advise my audience peers not to rely on them for verified information. For general people where media literacy may not be big, how do we effectively say that, hey, don't trust some media outlets, but trust these, or something like that? It's actually an excellent. Can I just say, this happens to me all the time, Aditi. When I tell people, I feel like saying, hey, don't trust the media, but then I'm from the media myself. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's exactly what I say to my students too. You don't have to trust the media. You don't have to trust your professor. Check by yourself. And then you realize that, okay, at least this article is all fact-based, whereas the other article I checked and there's a lot of like, misleading out of context material inserted into this coverage and that coverage. So I often say, again, I say, you can trust, but always verify. So same thing, if flip side of that is you don't have to trust, just verify and see it by yourself, check by yourself. So in a way, I think news literacy education and media literacy education is sort of like journalism appreciation exercise at the same time. If you know how to verify information and you realize that certain news organizations are always doing it and some other news organizations are not doing it, that's when probably they will trust you more, right? So yes, in a way, audience media literacy level affects the level of trust. That I agree, because this is supported by a lot of research that I've seen. In many authoritarian countries, if you look at that educated population, university degree, urban city, urban lifestyle, white collar jobs, they tend to be more critical of state-controlled media because they can read between the lines. But when you survey news audience in a rural area, they predominantly trust whatever they hear from the public broadcaster, regardless of how problematic or complete lies that and those news are very, not really fact-based, and it doesn't matter. So yes, audience media literacy level affects the trust big time, I think.
Right. Okay. Question from Sabina Rahman. How important is method in the pursuit of truth and eventually trust building? And I just want to, I mean, for fact checkers, the IFCN guidelines are quite clear, so we follow that method. But generally speaking, how important is method?
I think in fact-checking world, especially if you're a signatory to the International Fact-Checking Network, then there are certain methodology you have to follow. And I think that's a good guidance.
What about for journalists, though, generally? Generally for journalists. I mean, can I just build on that question and say, okay, when a journalist who is not working for a fact checker, there is no guideline, right?
Yeah.
That's one. And then is trust is just following the guideline enough? So they're two related questions. So, sorry for interrupting you.
Again, I think I'm really trying to separate journalistic work from the trust, but if you are thinking about people trusting your work, then certainly certain journalists are more good at promoting themselves on social media, for example. There are certain ace reporters who have huge following on X and Facebook and LinkedIn and whatnot. They kind of know how to, well, I mean, if you are talking about those reporters who produce quality journalism, they always try to, be transparent about their methodology too. So for example, a reporter I know who used to work in Tokyo as a correspondent for a US organization, whenever she goes out to press conference or interview prime minister, she goes to on Twitter and say, hey, I am meeting the prime minister in 1 hour time. Is there any question you guys want to ask? I can sort of summarize what you want to know and ask those questions. So she tries to build personal connections with the audience. And then she's been doing that for many years. And I think her name is a sort of like, trusted name within that news organization. And she was personally doing that. So building personal relationship with the audience might be helpful. And if you want to do that, then obviously being honest about your methodology is very important, I think.
Okay, this is great. Building personal, I wanted to, that's something I want to follow up on. You say, building a personal relationship with the audience. Increasingly, there's a realization, especially we're in the era of influencers,
Yeah.
So it's all about building a personal brand.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. So what do you say when people, when, so on the one hand, you want to build trust by personalizing yourself,
Mm.
finding your authentic voice, okay, and
Yeah.
showing yourself to be more human. And on the other hand, you have these journalistic principles
Mm.
about, writing in a very dispassionate voice,
Mm.
not introducing yourself as a player in the story, even though
Mm.
your very presence,
Yeah.
affects the report that you're. So how do you reconcile that?
I think you don't have to reconcile that. I mean, there are many styles of journalistic work, and some people are good at, building that personal brand. And other people are more straightforward newswire type of journalist. No, I just want to tell facts. I want to, hide myself from the story. I'm the fly on the wall. I'm a traditional journalist. That's okay too, right? I think there has to be a variety of ways to tell the story, and I think you cannot please everybody, right? Certain audience likes more straightforward, just bullet point list of facts, and journalists just fill in a little bit of a context, and that's enough. And other people want to know more personal, account of newsmakers. And if there are some reporters who are good at sort of soliciting those kind of, personal side from the news sources, and that's fine too. So I think it really depends on what sort of journalist you want to be. And then if you belong to big news organizations, then they can have a variety of different types of reporters. So that's good, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think journalists have been able to, in some cases, straddle the two worlds also by
Mm.
using Twitter to for the personal thing, and then of
Yeah.
course connecting it to the reports. Okay, so let's look for a few more questions. I'll come to Karen's question towards the end. We have Vinayak Jha asking a question. Hello, I'm Vinayak, a PhD scholar from Central University of Jharkhand. I want to ask whether you believe that Maria Ressa's way of building trust through revolutionary journalism mentioned in a book, How to Stand Up to a
Mm.
Dictator, if journalists in other countries can also follow such conditions. I mean, follow that path.
Um, yeah, so I think in my presentation, what I was trying to say is that, I mean, I admire her work, but is she actually gaining more trust from the public in the Philippines? That's at least, uh, I'm not quite sure because, again, it really depends on the society. If you are in a really polarized society, and if you stand up and be vocal about your belief, then definitely you get attacked more often. So that might actually add, fuels to the already burning fire. So it's not necessarily helping to reconcile two different political spectrums. Maybe you are further, you know, um, you might be making things worse. I mean, that's unfortunately the reality. Um, the problem is, we think democratic society is better than authoritarian society, but not everybody agrees with you. And if you believe in free speech, you should be okay with that, right? So you are on the side of, freedom of expression is important, press freedom is important. We should be free to say whatever we want. We should be free to, convey what I think and believe. But if you believe in that, then you should give the other side the same chance to be heard. Whereas the other side doesn't believe in that. They want to control the information flow, and they are good at it, and they have the power, they have the money. So in a way, it's not a, how do you say, a fair playing ground. And if you are working in that environment, I don't know if revolutionary journalism is going to actually give you more trust. I think it might make things worse. More people would hate you. And but if you believe in cause, then that's what something you have to bear, I guess. I mean, India produced Gandhi, right? Wasn't he initially kind of an outcast? Or Nelson Mandela, for example. I think the trust comes much later. Um, I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. On the subject of Gandhi,
Yeah.
he is the subject of a lot of misinformation in India,
Right.
and also new kinds of interpretation over his life. So that is like several seminars worth anyway. So
Right. Right.
I'll steer
Right.
clear of that.
Right.
But so I think we have two more questions actually, because Erkin Kamalov said, "Act like you trust, but always verify." Essentially, what you said, just
Mm,
repeated that as a mantra, which is great.
mm,
Um, and then, so I'll get to Karen's question and then Shrijit's question. If I think we can wind up in an hour's time, but if you have
okay.
any last questions, just slip them in, and I will stop taking questions at some point. Uh, so Karen asks, given that you work with students closely, how do young news consumers, if there are any, how do they think about trust when consuming news online or on platforms like TikTok?
So this is where the big gap between traditional media literacy educators and journalism educators and journalists, working journalists have. If you look at the classic media literacy materials from 1980s, they always say message is constructed, media content is constructed, right? And they say because media is constructed, when the information is packaged and delivered, it is inevitable that the creator's intention and point of view is included in the information. So in other words, if you think about media literacy as critical thinking skills, if you think media literacy as an attitude and skill sets to identify what those possible viewpoints are when they come across certain piece of information, and how media organizations or journalists are choosing the topic, agenda theories and whatnot. If you think media that way, definitely your message shouldn't be trust the media. It's the opposite in media literacy. Question the media, right? Question the intention. We don't know what their intentions are, but there might be something that is missing from here, which journalists are not including. But that's very important for you. So in a way, if you are encouraging students to critically evaluate media content, and when I say media content, this is not just about news. Media literacy includes like Hollywood movies and how women are portrayed in TV dramas and whatnot. So it's much bigger media. But when it comes to news, it's the same attitude, right? You have to question everything, and then that's the first step. That doesn't mean you have to be cynical or you have to be very skeptical. The idea is you question everything and then try to find out what is actually fact-based, which journalist is going through due diligence and more transparent about what she knows and what she doesn't know. So that kind of evaluation has to be part of the media literacy package, in my view. So what was the what was the question?
Given that you work closely with
Yeah,
students, how do young
yeah,
news consumers think about trust when consuming
yeah.
news
So
online
so I'd
or on
say
TikTok?
yes. I mean, I don't say this, but I would hope that the students don't trust anybody. They try to verify. They try to sort of lateral reading is another thing that many people encourage nowadays. If you like content from one influencer, don't just keep consuming the videos produced by him. Why don't you do a little bit of research on him? Maybe he had a tax evasion scandal 2 years ago. Maybe he had, another name he's using and then posting lots of like hateful commentaries on X you didn't know before unless you search more information about this person. So do a bit of research and realize, oh, I shouldn't be trusting this person or I should be trusted in this person. So in other words, I don't tell any students to blindly trust anything or anybody. Trust should come naturally after they investigate, you know, information by themselves.
Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
it's amazing when you think about how with the recognition widespread that we're living in a post-truth society and there's misinformation everywhere. There have been so many attempts by startups, universities, fact checkers, everyone else to kind of address this trust problem. So sometimes the interventions are technological. It's about rating websites, building plugins, stuff like that. I think you and I have seen a lot of demos that try to do that, but trust really lies in the eyes of the beholder, right?
Yeah.
So on that, I have one question. I mean, I'm going to ask you the last question, and then I'm going to add one question of my own, which is Srijit asks a question. False information is frequently propagated to build trust.
Yeah.
Aligning with a broader agenda.
Yes.
So yeah, absolutely. Even when confronted with factual evidence, many individuals prioritize their own beliefs over factual accuracy.
Right.
How can we effectively address that aspect and ensure the factual information resonates psychologically?
So there are, I mean, two aspects to this, right? I mean, for me,
Srijit, by the way, is my colleague. Sorry, continue.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah.
I'm a believer of education. That's why I've been doing this for more than a decade. I really think at the end of the day, it comes to each person. So if this person is trained in news literacy, this person knows how how propaganda machine actually works, the knowledge itself helps a lot. So it's like think about eating junk food. I think there's a huge difference between somebody who just consumes whatever they like to eat versus somebody who knows that, okay, sometimes I eat cheesecake knowing that this might be, not that healthy. So that awareness alone will change people's attitudes. Not always the case, but some people really become more health conscious with that knowledge. And smoking is another good probably analogy here. Almost everybody knows smoking is gonna kill you eventually earlier than you should be. But some people decide to, okay, I know smoking is bad, but I like it, so I will take the chance. And that's the person's decision, right? But at least this person knows that smoking is damaging to his lung and other organs. And if this person has that knowledge and decides to still smoke, and that's that person's life, I don't think we should be intervening and saying that, okay, the government should ban selling cigarettes entirely. I mean, you can do that. And if you think that's the right thing to do, then definitely you can push that. But again, my point here is that if this person knows that it's a propaganda, this person knows that this particular news item is not necessarily all fact-based, and yet this person decides, but I still like this news organization, I still like this influencer, and then I think it's that person's freedom. I don't think we should be restricting that. And that, if you want to restrict that, that's an authoritarian way of thinking, in my view. Yeah. I don't know if that answers your question. Yeah. But Venkatesh, I want to address the thing you said about the rating things. So I think it was last year or this year that, the News Guard. So News Guard is an initiative that rates news organizations. And New York Times score went down. It was like 90 something. Now it's like 85 or something. And I think that's really counterproductive, right? Many people saw it, oh, New York Times is now scoring lower than last year. So we shouldn't trust them, as much as I trusted them. It's like really counterproductive if you do it that way. So I think there's a lot of issues in trying to quantify or trying to push the trust, with numbers. Yeah.
I completely agree with you.
Yeah.
And it's very interesting to know about this rating.
Yeah.
There are two, three more quick questions. I think we budgeted for about 10, 15 minutes extra.
Sure.
So can I request you all to stop asking questions? We will answer the next three questions. And I'll leave I'll ask Masato something if we have the time. Seema Tiwari asks, how can we encourage ethical reporting I suppose to let trust prevail and other things prevail as well? How can you encourage ethical reporting?
That I'm not. I mean, certain news
Tough one.
organizations. I mean, at least the big media like AP, FP, Reuters, Bloomberg, CNN. I used to work for. They always have this like ethical code that you should adhere to. And sometimes you go through training, like Bloomberg's case, you get this thick book before you get the job, and then you are supposed to study those things. So I think at least the big news organizations are trying to address this problem and trying to, encourage ethical reporting by staff training and sometimes like, reminder to all the reporters like AFP. I know that they, occasionally produce a new like ethical guideline booklet and distribute it to their employees. So big organizations are at least trying to make that effort. If it's effective or not is another story, but at least there are some efforts done by news organizations. I'm not quite sure about the situation in India, but if you're talking about individual freelance reporters, then it's really up to them to uphold their own standard, I think. It's really hard to control that part. Yeah.
Yeah, the tough challenge.
Mm,
Okay, Tumaroj Koirala has asked a question. Basically, I can answer this on your behalf, Masato, because you've spoken about nothing but this.
mm,
What do you see as the future of audience trust in journalism? What steps can media organizations take? I mean, there is no formula, but what Masato has said, and Masato, you can correct me if I'm wrong,
mm,
but essentially what Masato has been saying all along is number one, don't obsess about trust. Just
yeah.
focus on your work. Okay, the trust will take care of itself. One potential way maybe is to sort of personalize yourself if you
Mm,
can, if you have the personality for it,
mm,
and project your authentic voice while still showing evidence that you're following guidelines when it comes to reporting. If that's not possible, if you're part of a big organization, follow their ethical principles. And
yeah.
we've also talked about NewsGuard that's meant to increase trust, but sometimes can backfire and
Mm,
can decrease trust and may not just do the job at all. So
right.
I really like the fact that the topic for today's webinar is how to increase trust. But really,
Mm.
the answer is you cannot increase trust. You can only focus on your work.
Yeah,
Is that
that way
fair,
trust will
Masato?
increase naturally in the ideal world, at least. Yes. Yeah, you summarized it very nicely, Venkatesh. Yeah.
Okay. That's good to know. Anonymous attendee has slipped in a question. What I
Mm,
mean, they say platform to search for common ground has been narrowed down. So there's no common ground. There are no shared
mhm.
facts. There is no consensus.
Right,
Majority folks are either taking a right or left or Republican
right,
or Democrat or whatever.
right, right.
So what do you do? I mean, it's just like a comment. I'm not even sure if it's a question. So any
Yeah, I
thoughts?
mean, I really don't know how to. I mean, apart from the things that we've been discussing, I don't know what more you can do if you're living in a polarized society. You just believe what you believe, right? If you think that the public should know this, then that's what you report. And if you think that this particular politician is lying, then you should point that out. Even if his or her supporter might hate you, still you think that no, this is something that public should know. So if you're sticking to that, and I think that's as much as you can do, whether that will help the society to reconcile or not is probably beyond what news journalists can, you know, do or think about.
Right. Okay. Erkin essentially says trust is often misunderstood, replaced by a loyalty.
Oh,
It
yes.
seems no one has authority over trust. Would you agree? No one has authority over trust.
Mm. Yeah, I agree. I mean, again, if you think trust as an emotional state, loyalty is another emotional state. So they overlap quite a bit. And I think that makes us human. right? I think it's a natural way that brains are reacting. So there's nothing particularly wrong about that. But I think media literacy education, news literacy education makes us aware of how our brain's functioning when it comes to emotionally driven content. So I think that realization is probably the first step to unlock um, uh, this, complicated problem. Um, People realize that, okay, I am having this loyalty to this particular brand because ABC. If they know that they are emotionally attached to it, that awareness alone will detach them from the blindness that they used to have. So I think that's the reason why I think educational intervention is important, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I agree with you. In fact, I've kept my last question for this,
Yeah.
which is, media literacy is all
Yeah.
about telling people how psychology works,
Mm.
how people are sort of taught to believe what they believe, and
Yeah.
so on and so forth.
Yeah.
And media literacy is usually the domain of educators.
Mm.
But my argument, as you know, Masato, is that
Yeah.
media literacy should also be seen as a kind of journalism or a type of journalism
Yeah.
where not only are you reporting the facts, but you're also giving commentary or analysis over how these facts can be misunderstood or
Yeah.
twisted.
Yeah.
And I evolved a system called the story check, which you told me will not work when we spoke about it 2 years ago or 2.5 years ago, whenever that
Right.
was. But I've still been thinking about it. What would you say about the whole idea of embedding media literacy in regular journalism and teaching it that way? Do you see that kind of thing ever working out?
Yeah, I think we discussed this before. I mean, at least the what's the name of the American Press Institute? They did come up
Yes.
with this idea of like organic news literacy. They are trying to find ways to frame their news storytelling as an educational material at the same time. So whether that works or not, but at least there was an attempt like that. And Venkatesh, your idea is even like one step further from there and then actually labeling, the narrative patterns and then making the audience realize why story is constructed in this way and that way. I think, yeah, I mean, it might help, it might not help. I'm not quite sure. But I think certainly we should try and see if it sticks or not. I think we are living in an age where like many things change all the time. Now it's dominated, our conversation is dominated by AI, and that seems to be the next week's topic as well. So journalism might change next year completely, so we don't know. But to keep up with that, then definitely we should experiment too. So different types of storytelling, different types of labeling, maybe you combining educational material with the news story reporting, that might be one way to go. If um, I don't remember how to call it. New York Times has an educational section. They often have like teaching materials that makes use of the articles that their reporters produced. So let's say you have like, I don't know, 200 articles per 3 days, and there's an education specialist within the company. They create like a teaching material, like a lesson plans based on those articles, and then provide those lesson plans to school teachers in New York. I think BBC used to do that in the BBC World. There was a kids news program, weekly program. And that news program, if you can watch it and it's enjoyable, but if you actually go to their website comes with the instructions for the teachers. So there was a lesson plan and how to use this particular news item to teach certain things like gender equality, for example. And here's what you can do in your classroom. Here's the discussion point. Here's the little quiz. So some news organizations try to do that, and that might be another way you can experiment as well. So there are many different ways to package education and journalism, I think.
That's very heartening to know.
Mm.
Yeah, so it makes sense what you said. I mean, for those who are interested to see how media literacy and a personal perspective can be brought together. My colleague Divya Chandra has put a link to a piece that I wrote trying to analyze a piece of misinformation. It was an attempt, and these are all attempts. These are all experiments. And we've shared it there on the webinar chat. I think that's about it. Masato, do you have
All
any
right.
last words of
Oh, no, thank you very much for
wisdom
inviting
or something like
me.
that?
I hope this conversation was provocative enough. That was our
It
intention.
was
So,
provocative.
yeah.
Yes, yes,
Okay.
it was
All right.
provocative as always.
All
Thank you
right.
so much.
All right. Thank you. Have a good
Thank
evening.
you. And next, you too. It's a good, have a good night.
All right.
And
You too.
some information left yet to be shared for you all. Masato, feel free to go grab dinner or whatever it is that you would do at
All
this
right.
time. Usually, thank you so much. So next week we have Karen Rebello speaking about deep fakes and AI. Karen Rebello, the same Karen Rebello who asked a couple of questions just now. Also, one of India's foremost experts in deepfakes and AI and misinformation, even though she works for Boom. I'm not wrong in saying that. And then we also have Ritvij Parekh, who is someone who is a coder and a journalist, and he works for a journalistic organization, and he works on news products, and he teaches AI approaches. So he's going to tell us a little bit about AI and journalism, and then Karen is going to talk about misinformation and deepfakes and so on. If this is going to be our last of 4 webinars, and in order to qualify for a grant, you should have attended at least 3 webinars, which means you should have attended the last couple and today, and then it's okay, you can probably give the next one a miss. Otherwise, please join the next one, and you will be eligible for getting a grant. And this grant comes from the International Center for Journalists, ICFJ, and we are, of course, Boom. Thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you very soon.